Yeah, I was just starting the webinar. Okay, could I ask people to take their seats? I think it's showtime, and hopefully people will have figured out where we are. Please take your seats. So, seats, please. Please take your seats. Ta-da! Showtime. Okay, so I thought I would start off with just a second of a lighter note. Many of you probably think that I always wear a bowler hat. Well, the rumors are not true. I don't always wear a bowler hat, different ways for different days. So with that said, look, we're really very glad that you're here today. This is going to be a discussion about whatever it says on my screen. Digital sovereignty, of course, standardization, security, competitiveness, many themes that are on everybody's mind. And with that, this is not a new theme for Europe. It's been very much on the agenda for the last year, especially this competitiveness issue. That's the reason why we had Draghi reports, why we had Letta reports. It's also the reason for the competitiveness compass. And many of you will have seen the leaked report from the Commission just in the last couple of days about startups and scale-ups. All of these very much along the same line. We had, of course, several years, the period of the last legislative bodies, the last Commission, where a lot of the air was sucked out of the room by the COVID pandemic and also by Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And there was a perception that we'd overlooked digital competitiveness during that period. Digital competitiveness, hugely important, just hugely important, and now a renewed emphasis on it as especially evident in these reports. But we actually look at it today from a different context than we would have a few years ago. In fact, we look at it in a different context than we would have a few months ago. The changed transatlantic relationship, the decline of globalization, suddenly we're looking at a risk of abrupt trade disruption, probably even greater from the West today than from the East. So many of the things that inspired European policy in these areas over the last years are going to need some serious rethinking. And that means we're looking at a changed world. In this world, it's important for Europe not just to be users of ICT technology, but also for us to be producers. So again, it requires a different view. If we look at the impediments to Europe, what we see in the Draghi Report, the Competitiveness Compass, also many years of research, including some of my own, usually there's a big four visible, and it's pretty much the same big four. Lack of access to skills, lack of access to capital, a still incomplete single market, and regulatory burden. That shows up for pretty much everybody. Are there things that we can do about this? Yes, a lot of them actually are already getting looked at. A lot of them are on the program for the new commission. Some of them actually have already had some things done, arguably not nearly enough. For skills, we see also, by the way, in this new leaked memo, a strong focus on access to skills. In some ways, it's a hard problem. At another level, we may actually be facing a historic opportunity to attract talent from the United States, let's say refugees. I have a couple from my family, I might add, so you know, I'm very much aware of this, and I think there are things that can be done. In terms of capital, clearly there will be an infusion of capital from public sources, but we also need infusion from private sources. I've been arguing for a while that pension funds and insurance don't do nearly enough in Europe. If you look at the United States, pension funds actually had more to do with the creation of Silicon Valley than clever entrepreneurs. A subtle change in US pension law in 1974 was really the starting gun for Silicon Valley. In Europe, it's like 1/100th of 1% of assets per year. So there's a lot of room to grow. This was taken up in the Draghi Report, and it's also taken up now in Competitiveness Compass. We need to unshackle private capital for European industry as well. As far as regulatory simplification, clearly an emphasis not only on the refit process, but also on a series of omnibus bills. And as far as single market, it's a tough set of problems. Probably the most interesting innovation comes from Mr. Letta's report initially. That's this 28th regime. I personally will be doing work on this over the next year, and I think it's a very promising way to solve problems that have historically been intractable, like non-bank insolvency. So there are things that actually can be done and will be done. There are also things that either shouldn't be done or shouldn't be done the way they're being done. I had the honor of doing a presentation to the jury committee of the parliament just 2 days ago about the new omnibus regulation. I would have to say that while the direction of travel is clearly correct, it's really a blatant example of the commission not doing their homework. No new public consultation, no impact assessment on a hugely complex bill with very complex implications. They didn't even publish the required factual summary from the public consultation that they did at the end of 2023, even though they're clearly required to by the better regulation guidelines. So again, this stuff is important and the details matter. If we don't pay attention, we're going to get it wrong and we risk a cure that's worse than the disease. So for that reason, it's really important that we have discussions like the one that we're having today, assembling absolutely top flight experts. I'm really proud to have the opportunity to introduce such a high level set of panels. Plus, of course, the fireside chat with Mr. Letta himself, who in many ways really kicked a lot of this discussion off. And with that, I'm happy to turn over to my co-host, Stefano. Thank you.
Thanks, Scott. You said much of what was needed, and I totally agree with what you said. First of all, I'm very happy. I mean, to host at our institute, ICOM, the DeepIn network. I think, I mean, they are doing a fantastic job on these issues. I would add a point. I think, I mean, one of the problems, of course, with with European digital competitiveness in the last years, but I would say decades, was the fact that we were not able to exploit scale effects as well as we did in other realms. Let's think of trade, where, of course, Europe is a superpower. And this is clear in several aspects that are very important. Investment, first of all, and but also rules. And I try to explain on investment, this is true for private and public investment. Private because we know, I mean, it's one of the results of that. I mean, of course, we already knew of the Draghi report that basically the average size of companies in Europe is smaller than in the US, for instance, but it also China, and so this, of course, limits the opportunity to invest in innovation. Of course, we are speaking of competitive markets. We want competitive markets, but at the same time, we know that resources needed to innovate are huge, of course, and so you have to have the right scale to do that. But this is also true for public investment. And one example of policy failure that I quote, unfortunately, about Europe, I think we need to talk also of failures, because otherwise we don't learn from past lessons, is the coordinated plan on AI. That I think it was a nice initiative put forward by the Commission and the member states in December, I'm sorry, 2018. But unfortunately, and trying to coordinate strategies and actions, especially on the investment side for AI, but unfortunately, it was never fully carried out. The deadlines that were thought at the time were not I mean, respected, and every country basically put forward their own national strategy. There were no coordination at all at the end of the day, apart from some programs. And the programs where that coordination was put forward by the Commission and the member states were successful. The only example that is recalled basically on digital technologies of success was the HPC initiative, because in that case there was a joint undertaking that was signed and subscribed and put forward by the Commission and the member states. Secondly, on rules, here, I mean, as you already said, we don't have really a single market, and so we are speaking of the 28th regime. We are speaking of the startup and scale up initiative, because basically we have companies. Let's think of startups that have real problems in scaling up for several reasons. Of course, there is also the capital issue that is very important, but is also the problem is that if we have a capital, a fully capital union, but at the same time we don't resolve the fact that a startup has in front of them, I mean, they have 27 different regulatory regimes to to say the least, because we have also complex situation at regional and local level in Europe. But I mean, to say the least, 27 different regimes. It's very important. It's almost impossible, I mean, for a startup to scale up, and certainly it's not possible as in the US or China, where, I mean, of course, there is a real and true single market. So I think these are very important issues, and I think we need to work priority on these issues. I'm slightly worried by a looming protectionism that someone, I mean, envisions for Europe. I think that the solution is to our problems is to work on these issues, and this is our first best strategy. While I mean, an autarkic Europe, I don't think is a viable strategy. Of course, we need to help European companies to be more innovative, to succeed, and this is something that we haven't done successfully. I mean, this is clear in the past, at least in the digital area, but also in other sectors. But one thing is working for I mean, a more innovative Europe and more innovative companies, and another matter is I mean, to raise barriers and trying to I mean, to be protectionist. So I think they are very different results. Of course, sometimes is a little bit blur the situation, but I think we have to be clear about it as much as possible. So say that, I think we can start the conference.
Good. So we can move on then. And if Dr. Manganelli would come to the fore, I think you're chairing the next panel and the panelists, and we can get going with the real work for the day.
So can you see? Yes. Thank you very much, Scott and Stefano. And I will chair, coordinate the first panel of this workshop, so balancing strategic autonomy, open markets, and tech leadership. And I invite to come to the stage Mr. Robert Condon from Ericsson and Alessandro Groppelli from Connect Europe. And I think Ms. Despina Spanou is not arrived yet, but they told me it's on her way. So very probably will be here in a few minutes. And in the meantime, I would like to say some introductory word about the title of the panel. So why we put together this balancing exercise discussion about strategic autonomy, open markets, and tech leadership. I would start very briefly, some few words, which allow me also to wait for Ms. Spanou to come. And I will start from a very interesting Joint Research Center paper that was written in the center of the research center that the European Commission was written in 2020 about the open strategic autonomy, which I found at the time very interesting, and as usual, the JRC produced very interesting work, and which described the open strategic autonomy, emphasizing that the EU should act independently in strategic areas while preserving global partnership. And the observation was that in the current narrative, the open part of the strategic autonomy was progressively losing momentum and decreasing in its importance. And now the discussion is mainly about strategic autonomy, and so without considering any more or not as, at least not in the slogan, not formally, but of course it's something that we have to consider substantially in order to develop policy, because it's something that really attain to the market, how markets are functioning, or global market are functioning in the moment. And so it's very important to consider this part. And in the narrative, maybe one reason for which it was lost, this open part, is because, of course, the open strategic autonomy implying some balancing, implying some trade-offs, which are always difficult to address, to motivate, to explain in the policy-making process. But of course, are very important. And in fact, the Council, also a paper of the Council, the General Secretary of the Council, defined the fact that strategic autonomy is not a zero-sum game, but rather a sliding scale between full autonomy and full dependency, with different results in different policies areas. And this is very, very important, because the strategic part of the strategic autonomy is not referred only to the strategic sector, but also the fact that EU should decide strategically how and use this capacity to be autonomous. And that's bring us to the definition of what open strategic autonomy or strategic autonomy would mean. It's passing from a dependency to a very likely an interdependency. So the fact that we could be able to have alternatives, and so reasoning and dealing in a way, in a level playing field, and not be dependent. And of course, this entitle a lot of trade-offs, which we will address also during the discussion, and it's very important. Another part that I would like to start to emphasize before starting the discussion is that a part of the strategic autonomy is also referred more strictly to the concept of sovereignty, and in particular political sovereignty. So the autonomy to legislate, to regulate, in order to preserve the values, the principles that are underlying our society, without having been conditioned by any economic dependence or technical dependence from external party. So the fact that you should be able to maintain, develop its regulation, enforce its regulation without being affected by any dependency. This, of course, this concept, this side of the autonomy is much more strictly linked with digital sovereignty, and most likely is one part which is must not be subject to balancing, because of course it's a very core of the value and the principle that underlying our society. And then the last thing that I would like to say is that most likely this is related to the fact of how regulation should be embraced and approached in order to strike a balance, how to reconcile competitiveness with competition, which should be a sustainable and fair competition. Sustainable meaning not in the markets, in the European market, not being excessive or artificially increased. Fair in the meaning that level playing field should be created between different actors that are active in the European market. And of course, another part, which is also very linked with both the Letta and Draghi report, is of course the exploiting of the single market, which is our most valuable asset, and the fact that competitiveness is strictly linked with the innovation. And so the way to competitiveness in Europe is a way that should pass from innovation. So at this point, I will start with the panel, and I will start most likely with Robert Condon, who is head of government and policy advocacy in the EMEA region for Ericsson. And I would like to give the floor to Robert to address more or less these concepts, maybe highlighting the perspective on a new vendor and innovator, which in a way is is a leader as it pushing Europe at the forefront have done that for many decades, but still is doing that, and how this balancing of strategic autonomy, open market should be pursued in order to enhance the competitiveness and autonomy of Europe.
Thank you, Antonio. Hi, everyone. Good to be here. Good to see my old friend Alessandro. I almost didn't get here. I went to the wrong place. I hope that doesn't say anything about my strategic autonomy. I think Ericsson are here because, look, if you look at the technology stack, the really critical infrastructure, it's the only place where the US or China doesn't lead globally, or where the US doesn't lead. China have a very strong player. So we have a certain credibility. We have 50% market share globally outside China, and 5G, it's in the 30s if you include China. And very few European tech industrial companies have that. So I guess it gives us a certain perspective. So we like the open part of strategic autonomy. We're in 180 countries around the world and have been trading openly for nearly 150 years. We control 60,000 patents. We spend 5 billion a year in R&D, 60% of which is in Europe, which gives us, some ideas about how we fix this, how we move forward. For me, for us, strategic autonomy depends on tech sovereignty. It depends on having a strong tech sector. I think Europe needs a home market to compete. It needs to fix its home market. I think regulation needs to enable rather than hamper. I think connectivity, one of the few areas we lead globally, is a horizontal. It's an enabler of AI and cloud and edge and what will be smart factories and smart cities, etc. And we need to think more about that. I think the EU needs to enforce its own rules at home and abroad. We've been a little bit naive, arguably, over the years. And I think finally, the strategic autonomy, and open markets, they're not competing with each other. They're not incompatible. I'm Irish. I come from a small country that's incredibly open by all measures, and yet it's had a plan for decades. It's had a plan that involves skills and education, yes, some tax arbitrage, but also investment. And it's had an industrial strategy, and yet it's the most open economy in Europe. So you can be open and have an industrial tech plan. So just getting back to some of the details, I talk about strategic autonomy depending on tech sovereignty and tech strength. The reality is, in our lifetimes, European GDP versus the US has slipped back by 25, 30%. We were largely on a par before the financial crisis, right? These are facts. I know some of it is the strong US dollar. I know some of it is us taking an extra 3 or 4 weeks holiday, but still, we are behind the US as a measure of a successful economy. And why does that matter? Well, it matters because in the context of tech sovereignty, because that gap is largely technology companies. If you look at our share of the Fortune 500, but look at R&D. There's in 2023, the Magnificent Seven, the big American tech companies, invested as much in R&D as half the total private and public European investment. So 7 US tech companies spent half of the entire European public and private sector on R&D. That's the whole ball game right there. We have to unleash our tech companies to close that delta and close that gap. How do we do that? So finish the single market. Sandra will talk about the issues that his members face. We fully support that. Letta and Draghi, it's great that Mr. Letta is here. The IMF figures about and you look at internal service sector, which includes digital and tech, they estimate we have 110% internal tariffs right now in Europe on digital services. And that's part of what Mr. Draghi, Professor Draghi talks about. So finish and complete the single market here to allow the scale that's necessary for the R&D. Unfortunately, tech is a scale business and it's very capital intensive. And it's now where productivity is coming from, hence my focus on it. Next point I would make, and I'll finish up in a moment, Antonio. We do have a great opportunity because of what I said about connectivity being a horizontal. We had a connectivity event with EVP Verkinen and other leaders in January, and the CEO of SAP and ASML, two of the other few European global tech champions, both spoke about the importance of connectivity. And unfortunately, and I'm looking forward to hearing Alessandro on this, if you look at 5G mid-band penetration, it's 95% in China, it's 90% in the US. We tend to think that European infrastructure is better than the US. Might be with trains, it's not with digital, it's way behind. Europe is 40%, something like that, 45. So despite us leading in this technology sector, the actual infrastructure quality is behind our major competitors. I mean, this is all in our hands. We can't blame anyone else. We have the strong, we have the operators, we have the creators, the manufacturers, us. So let's get it done. The final point is about level playing field and, enforcing our own rules at home and abroad. There was a DG Trade paper last year on distortions with China in the telecoms market. It's very interesting. I'd urge you to read it. The reality is they're playing by different rules. I think we need to wise up a little bit. And we have now, the EU has more tools to deal with this over the past couple of years. We like the simplification agenda. I totally support the idea of improved capital markets. I remember one stat, it's a London stat, which is the largest sort of capital market center in Europe, not in the EU, obviously, but 5% of UK pension funds are invested in the London market, only 5%. 95% goes abroad. That's, again, it's going to be similar, I would wager, in Paris or Amsterdam. So it's a wasted opportunity. So yeah, look, we fully support Draghi and Letta. We're sort of very conscious that the Commission and the new von der Leyen Commission is trying hard to change things, and I think they're getting the message. And yeah, I hope we can work with all of you and policymakers to push it through, and Despina. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Robert. I would invite Mr. Despina Spano to join us in the stage. And so if you don't mind, I will give you the floor. No, I was saying the opposite, just now.
My apologies to the crowd, but I was held somewhere and
No problem. So Mr. Spinaspano, who is everybody knows, is a principal advisor of DG Connect, coordinating the technological and security issues, which is of course very relevant in our discussion. And I will give you the floor, of course, try and ask you to address how the Commission is addressing all these topics in the policy-making narrative, but also starting to operationalize those concepts with different action, and especially regarding the security aspect, how the security aspects are related to the discussion about strategic autonomy. Because one thing that I noticed that a few years ago, when we were talking about strategic autonomy, mainly facing some risk from China, the terminology was more de-risking, which of course is more also semantically more strictly connected with security. Now is bits changing, but also the semantic. But I think that of course the security part is still very, very relevant and crucial. So I would like you to ask you to say a few words about it.
Thank you so much. I'm sorry, Alessandro, you should have been speaking, because you were on time. But I got here on time to listen to Robert, who gave me a very good sort of introduction.
Yeah.
And I appreciate the positive spin on the Commission's efforts. So thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for inviting me here to give the Commission's perspective, even though I'm kind of giving you old news, because you had Executive Vice President Kuhnen in CEPS very recently, I think, and she spoke about these topics. But I think we are in the middle of so much that is happening that whatever we discuss is very relevant. And as you know, we are shaping a lot of actions right now. It is not working. Is it my fault? Not only I arrived late. Now it works.
Yes.
It's my fault. Not very tech.
But secure.
But secure, yes, exactly. Nobody could hear me. I was very secure. I was a good icebreaker. I did it on purpose. So, again, my apologies. So, thank you. Again, you're putting on the table here when I look at the title so much, but it's exactly what is in the heart of policy making today. It is in the heart of what decides a lot of our partnerships across the world. It is quite incredible, but at the same time, very much true, because we've seen recent analysis that says that within the next 10 years, 70% of the value of our economy will be based on the digital enabler, the technology part. So we cannot escape this discussion. So a lot of people talk about this tech race. I don't think it's a race, because everybody is running on different tracks. Some are running on the track of developing the technologies, others on developing the regulatory framework. You know who I'm talking about. Others are doing part of the technology, the embedding aspect. So I think we all need to do our part and face all these technological challenges. So in the heart of this, we have a portfolio that was created. Executive Vice President Vinkunen, that you accommodated here a few weeks ago, has a portfolio created by President von der Leyen on the basis of the wisdom acquired after 5 years that represents all these elements. And I think when she came here, she gave you the definition of what tech sovereignty is. And I will repeat what she said for those who may not have been there. She defined it as our ability to independently develop, deploy, and regulate. Regulation is part of it. Key technologies and digital infrastructure, ensuring that our interests, values, and security are protected. So security is an embedded part of all of this, and I will come to that last possibly. And Vice President Vinkunen recalled the imperative to promote innovation made in the EU. So this is very much of the narrative of the second von der Leyen Commission, to reduce dependencies on non-EU technologies and suppliers and enhance the EU competitiveness of the global market. Now, it is very important to make clear that when you want to develop European technologies, it's not because you want to necessarily exclude certain technologies. You want to exclude the risk, as you rightly said, where that comes together with some technologies, but you also want to create an environment that is richer for digital technologies to deploy. I think that the Commission has already taken a lot of concrete actions only within a few months of the beginning of the mandate to accelerate our path to European tech sovereignty. The key priority being to step up investment. So as you have seen, we have allowed a lot of actions to step up investments and scale up innovations in the areas that are the most critical: AI, semiconductors, quantum and supercomputing, cybersecurity. This is just to name a few. And this follows the approach called for by Mr. Draghi, who highlighted in his report that the EU needed to invest 150 billion more a year for digital technologies only. Now, on supercomputing and AI, I will go straight to the issues that are linked to innovation and competitiveness. We presented recently the AI Continent Action Plan. You're all aware of it, following up on President von der Leyen's announcement for 200 billion of AI development across Europe, with the ambition of boosting our capabilities and creating an AI space in our continent. Then on semiconductors, with the EU CHIPS Act, we have already mobilized 85 billion of public and private funding to increase Europe's security of supplies of semiconductors. And we announced in the AI Continent Action Plan that the review of the CHIPS Act next year will also bring more. And then we have quantum. And what we're missing at the moment is a real ecosystem for quantum development. And as you know, we have the upcoming quantum strategy that will help us foster an ecosystem to prioritize funding, coordinate wide quantum computing platforms, and secure communication networks. And then we have the Digital Networks Act that will also come, and that will reinforce competitiveness and the single market that you mentioned. This is where we're going to do that in the Digital Networks Act for the benefit of end users, businesses, but also the society. Now, you mentioned simplification. I don't think I go to any seminar, conference, meeting, and this is not on the agenda. This is very much on everyone's head. I think very much prompted by the AI Act. Let's be very frank. I think that the first thing that people have in mind is the AI Act. The AI Act is very complicated per se, but it's the basis that will make us more competitive in Europe, because we will create a level playing field. As you see, we're trying to mobilize as much clarification around it, but of course, it's not just about the AI Act, it's about everything. And the simplification package before the end of the year, I think, will come to help with all these actions. Now, speaking of security, you have seen that we have come out strong on cybersecurity with our actions with the European Commission. We started with a vertical initiative on the healthcare sector. We just agreed actually this week the blueprint for the operational aspects for coordinated action in case of cyber attacks. And later this year, we have the adoption of the Cybersecurity Act 2.0, for which there is an ongoing consultation until the 20th of June, and we invite you all to participate. That will address also the issue of risk more widely, the issue of risk technology, as you may call it, certain areas where we need to take extra measures in the supply chain, address supply chain issues. So it will be a much wider perspective than the current Cybersecurity Act, dealing only with the mandate of ENISA and certification. Certification will also be important because it is part of the competitiveness and innovation. It needs to work for the markets and not to delay markets, actually. And we will continue also to create more transparency, because we need that in security. Just a few days ago, 2 days ago, our European Cybersecurity Agency launched the European Vulnerability Database, ENISA's database, which will bring together vulnerability information relevant to the EU market from trusted sources, and will allow private and public sector stakeholders to protect themselves, protect our digital infrastructure from potential threats with greater efficiency and autonomy, speaking of autonomy as well in your title. So I think we are trying to do as much as possible. The problem we have in Europe, and that we often forget to talk about, is, okay, it is one thing to simplify the regulatory framework, bring more investment, speak about the right technologies, but we don't speak as much about the people who will do that. We have a real issue with people, and in Mr. Letta's report, there was a strong call, but also from Mr. Draghi, and we tried to address it with the Union of Skills initiative that we adopted some time ago. You know, for cybersecurity, we have also a specific initiative, the Cybersecurity Skills Academy. I think it's very important that we invest on people, and this is where Europe can be very strong, because we have a very robust system of education and training, and we need to pass to lifelong training to upskill people as well. And also attract the global talent. We need to become a little bit more innovative in our approaches in the public administration, in how we attract talent, how we maintain talent as well. So these are just some of my key messages, I hope enough to start with.
Definitely, thank you very much. It's very for this overview, which was very comprehensive and very useful indeed about the approach of the Commission. Because as I highlighted, I mean, developing this policy, there are a lot of concepts and balancing them is the main challenge that the Commission is trying to undertake at the moment, which is of course a very challenging but fundamental policy direction. And I will give the floor now to Alessandro Gropelli, who is Director General of Connect Europe. You, of course, yes.
Roberto Violas does the royalties after we rebranded from Etno to Connect Europe. But
So the EU Association of the leading telco operators, net connectivity operators and service operators in Europe, which is continuing and modernizing the activity of Etno, the more long-standing association in Europe. And to Alessandro, I would like to ask you, of course, Ms. Panol mentioned the fact of the Digital Network Act, which is, of course, the forthcoming regulatory framework for the electronic communication services, and we'll see what will be exactly the scope. But one point that emerged in discussion is, of course, that one main issue connected with digital sovereignty is also the fact that, and strategic autonomy, the fact that Europe should fill the gap in growth and productivity. And of course, this is something, an objective also for the telecommunication sector. And I would like to ask you more specific how the policy action and the market in Europe should be evolving in order to address this issue, balancing these challenging objectives.
thanks a lot. I'm reshaping a bit what I thought of saying, because otherwise I would agree too much with Robert and also with Despina, actually, because I think that on the headlines, there is a very helpful alignment right now among many stakeholders, public interest, private interest. But how do we approach this tech sovereignty discussion in the telecoms world? I think the headline is basically that regulating the technologies that we buy from abroad, it's good and often it's necessary, and then I'll come back maybe a bit to that. Maybe not everything requires being trashed, as we hear in some debates, but it's an option B. So regulating something that you buy from abroad cannot be your first best. Your first best is to produce and have alternatives that are homegrown. And we heard it from Robert and Ericsson, and I'm thinking of Nokia. I mean, we have these crown jewels in Europe, which we should cherish. Why do telecom operators take an interest in this? When we approached our response to what maybe you remember is the white paper on the future on digital networks that was done at the end of the previous commission, when we started responding to that, we described a bit the changes that our industry is going through. And the changes that today we are virtualizing and cloudifying our networks. It means that all the network functions that before were physical and well described in Netflix series like Las Chicas del Cable, okay, that's from the past. In the future, we are cloudifying and virtualizing this. So the strategic question for Europe is whether in 10 years from now, we are still in control of our own destiny on the connectivity value chain, because we are used to have these beautiful, safe, historic companies called the telecom operators that are there in some cases for a century. We trust that they take care of networks. It's their job. They are European. They have the networks in the ground, so it's easy to regulate them. It's easy to tax them. They cannot be based somewhere else in the world. We are here. We employ people here. We pay taxes here. We are European, right? But what happens in the cloudified and virtualized world 10 years down the line? Will we still be in control of this, will still telecom operators be at the center of this ecosystem. So that's why I think that the tech sovereignty discussion is so important and it's so relevant. So the objectives that we see for policy and for how we are looked at by regulation and by policymakers are essentially three: investment, scale, and innovation, which, if you wish, is something we heard in the intervention by Robert, and that is implicitly or even explicitly in the political guidelines of the new commission, in the speeches of the commissioners, and so on. And the three most relevant pieces of legislation that we are looking at are the Digital Networks Act, already mentioned by Despina. Of course, the review of the merger guidelines, because scale is a matter that is not only in the hands of DG Connect and of Vice President Birkunen, but also in the hands of DG Comp and Executive Vice President Ribeira. And then the Cloud and AI Act, and I would say more broadly, the issue of industrial policy for connectivity. And there, I think we will see a lot of resistance to changing the status quo. We have seen it also in the reaction to the Letta Report and to the Mario Draghi Report. And so that's interesting that today we will have, again, Mr. Letta to tell us also a bit how the ideas of the report have been received. When I go around speaking, I often come across two types of authorities and regulators: competition authorities and telecom authorities. And it's funny that when I'm in a competition event, the competition authority on stage, to reply a bit also to my point, says, well, it's not our job. The problem is the single market. Go complain to the Commission and to the telecom authorities. They need to harmonize. They'll fix spectrum, and the connectivity ecosystem in Europe is fixed. When instead I go to the events with the European regulators, I hear them telling me, well, we barely even regulate markets nowadays. We do very little. Go complain to the competition authorities and to DG.Com that don't allow you to scale up. And when I go to my members, there is some resistance to change as well. On Monday, we got our policy summit that Connect Europe organized. We had also some alternative operators on stage, and they are very skeptical of changing and touching anything of the Digital Networks Act. They fear it. They would like to keep the status quo. So this is to say that probably each of us needs to leave and let behind some of the fears, and we need to change, because as Mr. Draghi told us very boldly several times, we gotta do something, because what we are doing is no longer working, which doesn't, it's not a value judgment on the fact that we did everything wrong for the past 30 years. It's just that the world has changed. And so we need to change with it. I'll conclude with 2 or 3 spicy things that are coming up in this tech sovereignty debate. One topic is protectionism or not. I agree very much with what Stefano said at the beginning. We cannot and we should not interpret our tech sovereignty push as a protectionist push. This said, I think we should also beware of lobbyists from the US who try to tell us that we are protectionist. I think they are absolutely not credible. Because if we look, for example, at public procurement, we had Thibaut Kleiner from DG Connect in our event on Monday. He was asked, have you measured how open other constituencies are in their public procurement to foreign technologies? Because, you know, maybe what you want to do here now with Buy European is too strict. And he reminded us that actually today we are the only open market. So I think that asking a bit ourselves if there are ways in which we can incentivize European technology is good. Deregulation, I mentioned it at the beginning. I think we need to beware a bit the discussion around simplification and deregulation and ask us for whom and why. Okay, because one fear that I have as a representative of telecom operators is that because changing the legacy regulation of telecoms in Europe is difficult, precisely because it's something old, established, with a lot also of case law, with a lot of organizations that do that, including in private companies. We have huge regulatory teams when maybe we should have smaller regulatory teams and bigger innovation teams. So it will be more difficult to reform our telecom laws than it will be to trash something that maybe has been done in the last mandate and that has gotten a lot of criticism around AI, DMA, or DSA. And my fear as a representative of European telecom companies who pay taxes here is that the deregulation wave will only benefit those who compete ultimately with my European members, big tech, and that because simply of legacy, it will be difficult to then change things on our European companies. I conclude also by saying that I'm optimistic. On day 5 of her taking office, I went to see Executive Vice President Birkunen with CEOs. We also had Nokia and Ericsson with us, so we didn't go alone because telecoms is an ecosystem. Too often in this town, when we speak about telecoms, it looks like you're gonna do a favor to Deutsche Telekom or to Telefonica if you do something. No, you're doing something for the ecosystem. And if we do well, Ericsson and Nokia do well, and the digital SMEs connected to the ecosystem do well. So we're working for the ecosystem. And then in January, we went also with the CEOs to see Ribera. I heard people being in a listening mode, being very open, but also wanting to change things and make a new, fresh political opinion on things. So I'm optimistic that we can change gear.
Perfect. Great. Thank you very much, Alessandro. Very, very interesting your approach. And I would like now to open a bit the floor for a couple of quick questions, because I hate events where you go and you don't be able to ask any questions. So if you, somebody can help me with the microphone. Yes. Ah, okay. You're good. The gentleman, one of the gentlemen there, yes.
Thank you very much. I'll be brief in order not to waste time. Tim Rentrop from the European Commission, but of course speaking in a personal capacity, especially as a former lecturer on the internal market at IPA in Maastricht. I fear there are a few elephants in the room which you do not mention. One is prudential rules. You mentioned we need to activate the private sector, pension funds. They are prohibited from investing in a high-tech, in a high-risk sector like tech. They can only do AAA stuff. And even if you would allow them, the risk of losing money of the pensioners would scare them away. You would have to change the rules to actually oblige them to spend, for example, 1% of their fortune on high-risk investment. Second elephant in the room, tax. The venture capital treatment by the tax man is not favorable for venture capitalism by anyone, private persons, professional investors, pension funds, unlike the US, where they get tax deductibility. That, of course, prevents the private sector from opening its wallets for this kind of investment. Third elephant in the room, posting of workers. You never speak to the trade unions. If you want to send your staff to another member state to install or maintain some of the equipment you sell, I see it with the control system in my heating, which comes from Austria, and the nearest after-sales service is in Maastricht. That engineer is not sending his staff. There are 2 vans pulling up in my house, the engineer and another master craftsman, because it's not then posting of workers. There's a lot of paperwork involved with that, which you never mention, but de facto, those are the restrictions. Third one, consumer protection and language system, a fourth one. In the 80s, I could order stuff from Germany without problems. In the 2000s, due to the consumer protection rules, I couldn't even buy ink for my inkjet printer from Germany because it was all in German, the paperwork, and I am German. But no, it's too risky to send it to Belgium and the Netherlands, even if it's a German national who orders it.
Thank you. Marcus.
Hi, Scott Marcus, CEPS. Let me just come in on this one point, since actually I think I was the one who beat the drum hardest about pension funds. I believe you're factually incorrect about whether there's legal restrictions on it in general. The pension funds are governed by the IORPS directive, which actually imposes hardly any constraints. I had a speaker from Pensions Europe on my panel just a couple of months ago who absolutely emphatically insisted that there is no legal prohibition whatsoever. As far as risk for the pensioners, the current level of investment by pension funds, and recall, pension funds have about 4 trillion in assets in Europe. Insurance has about 9 trillion. The fraction invested into venture capital today is about 1/100th of 1% of assets per year. Clearly, if they were to go up by a factor of, let's say, 20, it would still be absolutely negligible in terms of macroprudential risk. And given the shift in pension funds from defined benefits to defined contribution, where pensioners could have different returns based on how well their investments do, that actually would play well for this. Pensioners further from retirement would probably be much better protected by having pension arrangements that gave some flexibility and some ability to adapt to inflation than in the current arrangement. Some protections for pensioners would certainly be needed. Some member states restrict to about 5% of assets being invested, but that's still 3 orders of magnitude higher than the current level of investment.
So anybody else want to reply, Crispino? Okay. Yes, yeah. Another, yeah. gentleman, please,
Yes,
another
my
question.
name is Frank Peters. I'm a co-CEO of a small tech company. It's a brilliant panel. You complement each other excellently. So when you go to a doctor, you want a treatment, you want a solution. Yeah, sorry. If you go to a doctor, you want a treatment, a solution, a prescription. Before the doctor can give the prescription, he's doing one thing, a diagnosis. Diagnosis is 2 parts. He's looking at the symptoms. That's pretty easy. But then you need to understand why, how, the root cause. You presented the symptoms very well, Robert. But that's very visible. And much of that is known for years. Letta and Draghi Report are fantastic, but they're good summary, actually nothing else than a summary. I think, Despina, you gave some very good prescription. Let's see how it works. We all cross fingers. And it's good to hear the optimism in the panel, because we need that in Europe. I think, Alessandro, you try to align a little bit on the why, on the root cause. You mentioned people are afraid of change. They're resistant. But that's very high level. Or maybe I'm just not understanding good enough. Could you help me really to understand why are we not able in Europe, with all the purchasing power we have, we heard the figures, with the population, which is by far larger than the whole US, high education level, we are outpacing America. Why do we not come to that point and realize it? What's the real root cause?
Thank you. No, but maybe Roberto and Sandro.
Well, I can, just a quick statistic. We're too fragmented. There are dozens and dozens of telco operators in Europe. There's 3 in the US, 3 in China, 3 in India. In Europe, you have 4.4 million subscribers per operator. In the US, it's over 90 million. In India, it's 300 million. You don't need to be an economist or a telco CEO to know where it's easier to make money, from the 300 million or the 4 million. Now, that's slightly simplistic, but it's an issue, right? This is capital investment. You need to spend millions every year. So it's easier when you have scale. That alone, the change of the merger rules would lead quickly to more deals, like we saw in the UK a few months ago. As part of that deal, legally, they have to spend £12 billion on proper 5G networks. That is good for the whole economy. So it's not that complicated.
Maybe on the root causes, to complement what Robert said, because I agree. I'm thinking of 2 coming more from my personal experience of having seen the past 16 years of telecom policy in Brussels. Maybe one is that we consider telecoms just as a bill in your inbox at the end of the month, and that the job that we had to deliver was a low bill, full stop. That was the mission, which, if I get a bit political, I would also say that it's connected to a concept that was embraced by mainstream parties in the past, which is a European is a consumer, and we want Brussels to do consumer law, and that's it. Now, Brussels is discussing of people and of citizens. The Spina said it before. And a person and a citizen has more than one interest of having a low bill. I also want a good job. I want a secure connection. I want to trust who deals with the social media where my children are connecting, right? So there has been this shift. I was one of those fooled, if you wish, back in the ages by these things. Now we realize it. The second one is also that maybe we didn't understand precisely what big tech was. 15 years ago, just arrived in this town, I was getting invited by one big tech company to lunches with their chief evangelist. And we were fooled into thinking that these companies were basically NGOs. They are not. They are profit maximizing companies that pursued a very ambitious and successful business model, but there was no evangelist. Okay, and nowadays we understood also that going through the rounds, GDPR, copyright, DMA, DSA, going through these debates, we realized that it is much more. That today there is a kill switch that often is on the other side of the Atlantic. And in the moment in which you are told that maybe the US president is thinking that cloud companies cannot give cloud services any longer to Europeans, you realize that, or that the F-35 run on a cloud from a non-European company. Again, not to be protectionist, but it's a realization. So now we are realizing some things, and we were maybe a bit naive as Europeans, but now we know, and we are acting on it.
I liked your analysis with the doctors and that we are the ones writing the prescriptions. You can write the prescription, but then the patient has to take the pill. Otherwise, nothing happens. So I do not think that we are anymore in a philosophical discussion in Europe. We spend a lot of time here in Brussels, if you allow me, in the Brussels bubble, talking about the issue, but you need to sometimes stop and look around you. And Europe has changed a lot technologically. The fact that today we talk about AI factories and that we are creating hubs, that share security information, that we're creating high-performance computers in various parts of Europe, the relevance of chips. You talk about competition policy. I appreciate what you said about merger law, but look at state aid. We have decisions that have enabled a lot. For instance, after the CHIPS Act, we also have 7, I think, first of a kind state aid decisions that mobilized billions of euros. So Europe has changed. The world has changed. I do not think we are anymore in the prescription phase, I think, or even the diagnosis. The diagnosis, what I like in Europe is that we keep on making diagnoses. The Letta and the Draghi reports are part of that deal, but we're acting upon them. They are not just paper. So I think we're moving. The patients are taking the pills.
I wanted just to say something about what Alessandro said about the consumer interest and the price. It's something that also the narrative, also the academic approach should really embrace the concept, new concept of consumer. I mean, distinguish it between short-term consumer interest and long-term consumer interest, because of course this is something that a bit reconcile with this new approach, considering the citizens and of course the setting and the framing of the European industry and the European market. And maybe the last question to the lady.
So good morning. My name is Elena Santiago. I am the Director General of CEN and CENELEC, the European Committees for Standardization and Electrotechnical Standardization. First, thank you for this very good and inspiring discussion. I saw in the title of the topics today, standardization, and we haven't heard anything about the standardization, even if it is mentioned also in the
It will
letter.
be the second panel.
Okay, but if I may benefit from the opportunity to have these very good panelists. So standardization has been really a unique asset to support non-fragmentation in the European single market. Has been somehow remote, I must say, from the technology, and we have made a catch-up, and there has been a lot of emphasis in promoting European standardization in order to support competition and competitiveness, as we have been discussing today. Can I have the view of the panelists about how do you see standardization supporting the balance in the strategic autonomy, the open markets, and the tech leadership? And my second question, we were speaking about people and upskill. The European system is unique because we have got 27 members that need to work on one single standard. That's how European standardization works. One single standard, voluntary, that is applied for the single market. Do you feel that there is a need to upskill European industries, European companies, SMEs, and startups in benefiting from European standardization more?
Actually, to be fair, I referred to standardization when I spoke about certification, and I said that we need to make it an enabler of opening the markets and of creating global standards. And it's part of the work we need to do, especially following the Cyber Resilience Act that creates another level for security. Speaking about consumer, this is about bringing to everyone on connected products the same level of security by design, and their standards have a great role to play. So I think that with our certification rules, we give a great push to standardization, but we need to make it so that it is as international, as global as possible. Fragmentation of standards will not help, and I think that's also important for operators. So this is one of the things we want to fix, and it's part of the work we will be doing under the Cybersecurity Act. So I would look for that space.
Yeah, no, standardization is key. It's a European strength. The mobile world that the fact that we can land anywhere and our phone works, that's a European largely led incredible achievement. So we need to be cognizant of that. I love what Despina said, and I love Alessandra's point about the consumer mindset. We do need a producer mindset as well. You brought up security. I would have to point out that we have what's known as the 5G toolbox. The European Commission has rightly come up with that. This is because digital infrastructure and connectivity is systemically important. It's a critical national infrastructure, and we should use trusted vendors. We should enforce that policy a little bit more strongly, I would say.
Thank you very much. So I will now conclude with maybe very, very quick round from each of you with some key message or takeaway points, and I will start with Alessandro.
Maybe two things. One on standardization, just to complete the telecoms view. When I entered in the association 10 years ago, we had a standardization working group. Now we have a sub-work stream in a working group. Why? Because a lot of the people who were following standards for our members, who are the biggest telcos in Europe, have left because they cut personnel, okay? So now I know that it's on top of the agenda again, because of course there has been the discussions around 5G, and there Ericsson, Nokia, the European vendors help a lot. But also, you know, we try to be more present, but that's a problem because if you're not there, then the others are there. And then Europe is driving standards less than it was, for example, in the 90s when we invented the GSM standard that became a global export of tech. So now we hopefully do the same on 6G, but we need resources and we need financially stable companies in the telecom sector to do that. Last thing that I wanted to say, because we are about to hear from Mr. Letta, if people asked me in December whether I thought that the Draghi and the Letta report would be implemented, cynically, taking out my Italian cynicism, I would have said no. probably they have been put a bit in the, on the side because of that resistance. I've seen how telecom ministers commented the telecom policy in December. They barely mentioned the reports. They acknowledged them instead of welcoming them. And I was really negative. Then Donald Trump happened. And I've seen countries that have always been also very transatlantic, a bit understanding that they needed a bit to step up. And I see now the competitiveness narrative of the Draghi and Letta reports and the single market narrative coming back. Because as usual, and that's why I'm optimistic, good ideas, even though at the beginning they are resisted, in the end, when there is a crisis, you turn to the good ideas. And there is plenty of good ideas in the Letta and in the Draghi report, especially for telecoms. Final point, it's funny that I heard a lot in the past months, the Draghi and Letta report are excellent on everything except on telecoms. And then I went to discuss with the people in the teams of Letta and Draghi who wrote the reports, and I asked them whether the same was being said in other sectors, and they told me yes. So also in other sectors, the people who want to resist change are saying, the report is excellent, except for my sector. So I instead think that there is plenty of good ideas there. We need to hang on them very firmly, and even where it is painful, try to implement them and put them on the road.
Robert?
Yeah, totally endorse that. Why is Ericsson talking about all this? I mean, we're arguing for less customers, which is an unusual situation. But we're doing that because our largest market is the US, and Japan and India are also well ahead of Europe. And we see that there's an issue in Europe. So we of course have financial self-interest, but it's more than that. We're a proud European company that spends 60% of our R&D here. That's not sustainable if all our revenues are international. The R&D has to follow the revenues, yeah? So what we're saying, other tech companies in Europe are saying, this is a genuine crisis, which is why we're putting time into this. 4% of AI investment globally is in Europe, 4%. So we lost the consumer tech race. We looked like we could lose the AI race. We needn't lose the sort of industrial data AI race. We're still the best in the world at making high engineering. So yeah, I think the time for action is now. And as you say, perhaps the geopolitical tectonic plates have moved to the right place for implementation.
Thank you very much.
We were talking about the doctors and prescriptions. I think that we have to deal with a major technological disruption era at this point in time, and we need to stay very sober. Every recipe, which is the rules basically, contains some basic ingredients, and there we're talking about funding and people. But what makes every recipe different is what you add to that. And I think Europe has a lot to add in terms of how we see things on tech sovereignty, on our democracy, the role it plays, our economy and the role it plays. So I think if we continue that way, we continue to talk to each other, we will get there.
Thank you very much. And so I thank you very much the panel for a wonderful session, very interesting, full of insights, and I invite the audience to also to thank the panel. No, not really. Not very much.
Okay, so Antonio, Mr. Letta has signaled that he will be here momentarily, but he hasn't actually come quite yet.
Okay, so maybe we can invite people to have a quick coffee, but just to be ready to go back on the seats while President Letta is arriving, because otherwise we will not be able to do it.
Otherwise, there won't be a break scheduled, so probably not a bad thing to have a minute.
Yes, yes, yeah. Yeah, yeah.
Good, I will. Okay, good. I'm just trying to make sure. No, that's perfect. That's absolutely perfect. Good, okay. So it's a nice panel.
That was very nice.
I'll,
We haven't met Richard Doherty from Dublin.
I have actually, but,
I've been around for 40 years here, but about yourself.
well, Scott Marcus, I'm American by birth. Actually, I used to do a fair bit with Grand Europe when I was at the Vic. I was a director there.
Excellent. Okay.
Yeah,
So
so,
is that US?
this is, a German. I was a director there. Jonathan Dave was there. And, Jim Haas.
I came in last Brussels side to look after the fantastic young talent we have. But it would be really, are you around? I mean, would you like to come in and talk to some of the colleagues one day?
Are you here in Brussels?
We're here on Rue de la Loire.
Well, yeah, I can stop by and have a coffee with you.
Just-
Colleagues.
What I might do is get some of the Cambridge is our hub for Europe, and because of Brexit, I won't call them the American leadership around Europe because it isn't, but there was a kind of, oh gosh, would we be still welcome on the continent? Being Irish, I don't know the problem, but I just trying to get people. So if you give me, you have my cards, and just send me a mail or something. And do you have a card?
Of course. What are you?
I liked your style starting today. It was really good.
Oh, okay, thank you.
I mean, everybody says probably some of the statistics are frightening. I took a note there, something less than 1% goes into, of the pension funds and all of that stuff. I mean, it's just. Yeah, and I mean, I'm living in the Netherlands now, and I think 80% of the population, they still think it's about the country.
Yeah, we don't have enough European thinking as international thinking. It's an issue. It's really an issue. Let me just grab some coffee. I'd be happy to stop by. I don't actually live in Brussels, but I'm here quite often. We can.
Yeah, we can do it online. Because that our colleagues at Cambridge are not here as much as they should be.
Or they'll be online anyway.
There'll be 2 or 3.
Well, whatever.
About who to invite them. And see your bios, then we can.
Great.
Because you mean to me, maybe stuff, our guys are a bit more looking at the desk. How keen to get them out.
James from
Red Hat.
Oh, Red Hat, yes. I'm sorry, I should recognize. Yeah,
Where 24,000 people are going through it, sorry.
Please, everybody, we can reconvene and sit.
Meeting actually for,
Please, everybody, we'll start again. Everybody take your seat, please. Salve Presidente, come va?
So that's looking promising. I'm trying to get my coffee.
Lo so, grazie. Beh, tu Please take your seat, we'll start. A volte sono noi italiani siamo tutti. Ok. Please, we start. Please, everybody, we start. Okay. So we have here, please take your seat. Or anyway, stop talking. That's even fine. Okay. So we start now because we have not so much time, and we have President Letta here, and it's a great pleasure to have it here, and it's also a personal pleasure to interact with him. And everybody know him, but I as usual, will do some presentation. Is president of the Jacques Delors Institute and dean of the School of Politics, Economics, and Global Affairs at the Instituto de Empresa in Madrid, and former dean of the Paris School of International Affairs and Science Po, of course, former Prime Minister of Italy, as well, previously Minister of Industry, and also EU political affairs, right? But now mainly is the author of the Letta Report. So the main qualification stands there. So the report much more than a market, which is of course very, very relevant, very important, very timely. And before getting to the substance of asking some question about the content of the report, which are really strictly related to what we are discussing about, we have discussed about also, your report was mentioned several times in the panel. I would like to ask you some questions about how the follow-up of the report. So how has been received, and what is your feeling about policy actions that are taking place based on your report? And so what is your impression, and of course your motivation to go on in this path that you have undertaken and embraced?
First of all, thank you for having me here. It's a pleasure to have the opportunity with such a distinguished audience to try to spread some of the ideas of the report, but also to, as you just said now, to check how the report is today received. But first of all, what is happening in the institutions at European level, but also at national level, because what for me is the most important part is that in some months, I think in a small part because of my report, in a part because of Draghi's report, in a large part, thanks to Donald Trump, we are discovering that we have to be more united. We are discovering that we have to be more integrated. We are discovering that we need a single market that is strongly integrated. And I see today an awareness that wasn't so shared at the European and national level some months ago. So my first comment is that today the awareness is there, and the awareness made possible at European level to have a set of priorities that are absolutely not the ones that we had 5 years ago or even 3 years ago. And I see today a determination, both at the Commission level and at the political level, at member states, European Council level, even at the Parliament level, that wasn't there. I see today a big protagonism on the stakeholder side. That is the other most important part. So my feeling is that one of the most important preconditions for a change on these topics is there. And the precondition is to have a shared agenda, knowing that Europe doesn't decide with one signature on one executive order. That is not the way in which we decide. I know that someone can, I would say, wish to have this kind of method, but unfortunately it's not the method that can work, because even if some president of the commission, we say, could do that, there would be a rebellion in the 27 countries to this method. So it is clear that to be concrete and to act, we need to have a shared agenda. And today this shared agenda is there. The first steps from the Commission side are going in the right direction. But of course, the moment of truth will be from now on in the next months. And I see also a great determination from the Polish presidency. I saw something from the next Danish presidency that goes in the right direction. So I think there's a planet alignment that seems to be very positive and very interesting. Now we have to see if facts will follow these preconditions.
Yeah, that's true. And thank you very much. It's very, very interesting. And about, of course, the main aspect of your report, so the building of the single market, which is, as was mentioned before, the most valuable asset of the European Union, also on an economic point of view. So what are, and we are talking about here about mainly ICT and telecom sector, and what are, according to you, the main obstacle, political, economic, and technical obstacle for the building a true single market, and then how a single market could be leveraged to drive the digital transition and the competitiveness of the sector?
I start with a short story. To start teaching in Madrid, I rent a flat. I started a very easy, fast, and technologically very effective negotiation with a call center to change the electricity in the contract of electricity, and very fast we get the results. So the call center on the other side told me, very well, we are close to the signature. Please give me your bank account number and your telephone number. And we signed. I gave him my telephone number, my bank account number, and silence on the other side. And the man asked me, sorry, it doesn't work because it has to start with ES and it starts with IT. And sorry, it has to start with plus 34 and it starts with plus 39. And I can tell you that my first temptation was to tell, hey, I send you my report. Because it shows that it's my right to have electricity even with an Italian bank account and even with an Italian telecom number. But of course, it was not the responsibility of the call center. He has instructions. He applies instructions, and it's not a Spanish problem. It would be the same in Italy or in France. So the true problem is the fact that the practice, daily practice, is a practice keeping the defense of the national systems. And this defense is a very, I would say, is a way to defend on the short term and to weaken on the long term, because it is clear that I was obliged to open a bank account in Spain. I was obliged to open, to have my third telephone number after the Italian and the French one. And of course, someone in Spain and on the telecom side, on the banking side, was happy because they add another number. But there's someone else that is not happy because they can't grow. And this is the key point. We are limiting with this method the growth, and we are limiting the possibility to have European champions. This is the key problem today on these sectors that you mentioned. And the three sectors I put at the center of the report, financial services, telecom, energy, are the key sectors where you can have competitiveness and great global actors. And through this small behaviors that I just mentioned with this story, you are limiting all our protagonists to become at least national champions, but you stop them from being national champions to become European champions. That's very simple. And what we need today is to have European champions able to work at world level, not to have just national champions protected by the rules in their national environment, because continuing like that, these national champions will be, I would say, smaller and smaller, and that is the key point. And I underline one point: what I'm saying and the advocacy I'm trying to have is not in favor of a blind gigantism. Europe will never be the US. What I'm saying is that we need to keep one of the fantastic skills of Europe, that is the mix between small and big. And we have to keep this fantastic mix between small and big. The key point is that the small can be the same small of the past, is the big that has to be bigger, because the world changed. And the big of yesterday, that was a champion in a world of 3 billion people, can't be the same big of tomorrow in a world of 8 or 9 billion people. So we need to make the big bigger, passing from being national champion to European champion. So I think this is one of the main reasons why I try to put the problem of consolidations and scale up and creating and moving from 27 to 1 single market in these topics as the main, probably the main issue of the report.
Yeah. Thank you very much. That's very. I think you also touched the scaling aspect, which is of course crucial, and the fact that was also mentioned before about the approach, the short-term approach towards a medium, long-term approach, also in terms of consumer interest. So differentiating between the two, also the relationship between competitiveness and competition policy. The other point I would like to ask you is about innovation and the fifth freedom that you mentioned in your report. You propose a fifth freedom to complement the existing in the digital treaties, and in order to be deeply embedded in the single market. The question is, how do you envision its practical implementation, especially in terms of course of incentive for research and development, because also was discussed before that a way to competitiveness is really and unavoidably pass from innovation, enhancing innovation in Europe.
One of the main points at the base of my report and of Draghi's report is the awareness of the gap that we are having with the US in terms of competitiveness. And this gap, or the main point of this gap, is the big raise of US competitiveness in innovation through private capital. That is the key issue. All the figures are showing that there's a multiplication of private investments in the US on innovation, on research, on R&D, and they calculated that there's multiplication 4 times in the last 12 years. 4 times, it's big, 4 times. And I have to say that even the topics where today you calculate competitiveness and you check competitiveness, the most today importance also in terms of the public debate are for sure artificial intelligence and space. And on both, the US are winning not because of public money, they are winning because of private money. And it is sure that this is the main problem for us. Why? First of all, because we don't have a unique single market of financial capitals able to mobilize private capital at the right level. So the main point of the fifth freedom is to start saying that if we think that we want to be competitive, we need to be competitive starting where we are less competitive today. That is clearly innovation, R&D, and investments there. And we are not, I would say, weak because we don't have brains, we have, but the key point is that they leave and they go where they can find an ecosystem more able to help them to be successful, where they can find money. How many startups, for instance, in space, I mentioned space, how many startups in space are today growing in Europe with young people, very, very talented young people, and then someone coming from abroad, putting a lot of money on the table and buying them, and of course, bringing them out. And fifth freedom for me means, first of all, to create the conditions for private investment in innovation. That is today probably the main element that creates our weakness. Fifth freedom means the possibility to create a unique space for research, but also, for instance, for degrees. The idea to have a European degree, because we don't have today. The legacy of the past with this idea that education and so on is national, that is totally crazy. Today we are having European initiatives on many fields, but on education, for instance, because of the treaties, we are still with this idea of silos and with this difficulty. And so is it possible to move? I know Commissioner Zarieva is working very hard on that, on having the European degree, in my view, is one of the most important issues. So it's the other big chapter, to have a common space. There's there too the scale up. There too there's the scale up. How many places in our countries are places where you have, I don't know, 4 universities in 50 kilometers? And these universities are, of course, I'm referring to my country first. These universities, they have hundreds of years of history. And when you talk to them, hey, please, why don't you go together to Brussels to try to, you understand immediately the difficulties is a structural one. But there's a problem there to scale up. I am a great fan of the University Alliances initiative. That is a great point, but we need to invest. We need to scale up on that. In a few words, the key point of the fifth freedom is to have a flagship for the next years, is to clearly say that something that we know is important, we don't have the way to mobilize all the different protagonists in the direction of having this objective. Fifth freedom, also because the brand works in terms of branding, can be the way to mobilize. And of course, mobilizing means all the different actors, Commission, Parliament, governments, private sector, ERC, European Innovation Council, and all the different national CNR and so on. So I think we can use this brand as a great mobilizer, and I think, and I saw the Commission very much determined on that. We need really to consider it as one of the moonshot for the next years, and maybe that can be successful, maybe not. But if it is not, I'm afraid for our future.
Thank you very much. And in terms of university, also going into Tuscany, so University of Pisa, Siena, Florence, which are very, let's say, close. But they're starting, for example, they're organizing PhD in economics jointly, because that's something that are starting to build some scale. Okay, so I think it's nice also now to have the opportunity to open the floor to some questions from the audience. And please be very brief with the questions so we have the possibility to increase the number of questions. Start with the gentleman there, then Stefano, and then the gentleman down there. First, the gentleman here.
Kurt Geisert, I'm one of the guides in the House of European History. We had a discussion in Adenauer Foundation some days ago, topic, will we be 30 member states in 2030? You speak about the necessity of more integration. Will we be able for more integration in spite of enlargement?
Thank you for the question. That is very well done. The enlargement, in my view, is one of the biggest success of the European Union. And I'm a great fan of the enlargement and what happened. If we go in the different countries that were not members of the European Union 20 years ago, it's absolutely astonishing what happened there. And I think is one of the most important successes of the European idea to see what is happening in these countries. And the great success, the evolution, and the role that they are playing. And I'm very, frankly speaking, I'm very happy. Also because the world is changing, so the fact that Europe also is able to grow up in terms of dimension is absolutely necessary. The further enlargements are, on the one side, easier, on the other side, more complicated. Because there are, in reality, two enlargements. There's the enlargement of the Balkans, and there's the enlargement to Ukraine. Or when I say Ukraine, I can add Georgia and Moldova together. But in reality, I have to say that probably the topic of Ukraine will be in a second moment because of the present situation. I don't see, frankly speaking, the enlargement to the Balkans. If the Balkans are the three countries that are today in the pipeline, I don't see it as a great problem for the European Union. Because the possibility to have such an enlargement as soon as possible is something that I think can be absolutely feasible. The key point is, of course, to be able to arrange some of the topics related to what we didn't do 22, 23 years ago. That was the main problem, because, of course, is a responsibility not of the new countries, is a responsibility of the funders. The fact that we didn't have the agreement in Nice on the veto right, on the number of commissioners, it's not because of the new countries, it's because of the old countries. I say that because sometimes it's always good to remind to ourselves that the problem is not only the barbarians, the populists, the newcomers. Many of the problems are coming from the old, I would say, true Europeans, federalists, and so on. That is one of them, because the problem of Nice, today we are paying the price, still paying the price of the problem of Nice and I would say the superficiality of Nice. And in that point, I think we have to, I would say, to combine the two, but we are also to diversify because the timing is different in the two.
Thank you very much.
Thanks. We know quite well. Stefano D'Empoli, I spoke at the beginning. We are a co-host of hosting DeepIn network of this event. Just I was saying at the beginning that, of course, completing the capital union, I mean, the savings and having a savings and investment union is very important and essential. At the same time, you should have I mean, instruments that allow, especially startups, to scale up, because, of course, as you correctly noticed in the report, there is a huge amount of money that is going to the US, but and one reason is not having, I mean, this capital union in place. But another reason is that money spent in the US now is more profitable, also because startups become, I mean, the Google, the Meta, the Amazon, and so on. While we don't have any of these, and startups are prevented from scaling up. In that respect, I think one of the nicest ideas in the report, in your report, is of course the 28th regime. Scott spoke about it at the beginning. My fear is that national governments will be a little bit scared off from the 28th regime. Of course, it's a fear, because I think it would be a very nice idea to be implemented. What are the challenges in this respect from your standpoint, and did you have reactions after the report was published in this respect?
Well, your point, Stefano, is the fundamental one, because it is clear that the 28th regime can be a game changer for many reasons. It can be a game changer in terms of capacity to attract investments from abroad. One of the main reasons why today Europe is not so attractive for investments from abroad is also a general problem of image that we project, and the image is a continent over-regulated, complicated, with such a fragmented regulatory system, with regional and not only national frameworks and so on. So in the world, there are many more alternatives for capitals to be invested, alternatives that are easier, where you have all the help to go fast in the investments, to pay less taxes and so on. So the 28th regime, in my view, is crucial for that. It's crucial also for SMEs. It's not by chance that in the report I started linking the 28th regime with SMEs, and the fact that SMEs are taking advantage of the single market in a, I would say, not enough, because the single market is a great opportunity, but if you need to have 12 lawyers with you to be able to move from the Croatian to the Slovenian, from the Portuguese to the Spanish, from the Basque to the Catalan, from Italy to Austria, of course, you are immediately out of the game as SME. And we know very well that the European system is based on SMEs. So I strongly believe that 28th regime is crucial. It's fundamental, it's a game changer. At the same time, you correctly said that countries, until now, none of the European countries said something negative against the 28th regime. This is why I'm worried, because I'm afraid that they will try to, I would say, to put some obstacles in the details, and devils is always there, for the very simple reason that it's not easy technically to do it, but at the same time is the only way, first of all, to preserve national legislations, because the 28th regime is also is an optional one. So I think member states, they have to understand also, if they want to preserve their national identity, they have to allow the 28th regime. Otherwise, it would be impossible to do it. I am optimistic because I saw in the papers of the Commission a lot of references to that. So the Commission bought this idea of the 28th regime and is trying to push it. I saw it in the, probably it will be part of the Séjourné paper next week, and that is a good news for me. And so but we have to be very, the answer to your question is the following one. The most important condition for the success of the 28 regime is the advocacy work of the stakeholders at national level. If we have a set of stakeholders at national level pushing their national government to say, we want it, do not be wrong. National identity is not preserved by stopping the 28 regime. We as Confartigianato, CNA, SME United, and so we want the 28 regime. So please, national government, do not stop this initiative. So in my view, we need to have a strong advocacy work at national level on that. If we are able to do so, I don't see big obstacles, because the big obstacles will come from countries saying that, hey, my national stakeholders are asking me to preserve this national ecosystem. My constituency is asking me too. But if this statement is wrong, because the national constituencies will buy this idea, because that will help them to be stronger at European level, I think the main obstacle is overcome.
Thank you very much. Maybe the last question to the gentleman on there.
Yeah, thanks very much. I'm James Lovegrove from Red Hat, the world's leading open source provider. So it's a bit of a vested question in terms of open source and the fifth freedom that you've been elaborating today. I mean, to what extent do you see open source playing a key role in that innovation, education piece that you spoke about, and the extent to which today the facts, I think, speak for themselves in terms of if you had to recreate open source from scratch today, it would cost 8.8 trillion euros. And yet today anyone can access it and use the freedoms of open source to use, distribute, modify, and so forth, open source. And then maybe the point which you also touched upon, those three verticals, telco, FSI, and energy, all of them are using open source. I mean, 97% of the IT stack has open source components. And yet I think the report, if I may, didn't bring that out in full color. I was interested how you see open source playing a key role in this, and that also to perhaps not repeat the experience you had renting a flat in Spain, that you have this interoperability, portability, the ability of these big companies to grow beyond Europe, become global champions on the back of being able to co-develop through open source. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you for this point. It's crucial. I take it, linking it to maybe one of the most important topics for me, and I'm happy because I have the possibility to put it in this conversation and to put it at the end. So maybe it is at the end you say the most important conclusion. And my conclusion is that I think we should altogether create a great movement, participation, intellectual movement, big push, advocacy, to convince the European leaders to put at the top of the Berlaymont, when you enter the Berlaymont, so to put a placard. And in this placard, we have to take the tweet that Elon Musk 2 months ago wrote, and he canceled 5 minutes later, because the tweet was the tweet in which he said to the Ukrainians, if I switch off, you collapse in 1 minute. I think this tweet is what is, for us, the most important motivation to all what you said and all what is in the report. Because if someone like him can say it to the Ukrainians, someone like him can say the same to us. So he can say the same in terms of knowing that we are all vulnerable. I was in in Madrid the day of the apagón. Apagón is the Spanish term to say blackout. And you feel in a day like this one, by the way, the Spanish people showed a fantastic level of civilization. Fantastic, helping each other, and the same problem happened in the US some years ago, and people assaulted supermarkets, killing each other, and so on. And I think the Spanish people was fantastic that day. I had the feeling of what does it mean being vulnerable. So security today, as is my answer, security today, that is the most important probably mission for all of us, is not preserving our borders from tanks passing the border from Russia. I don't think tanks will pass les Ardennes. I believe that the main threat for us is to be vulnerable because someone will disconnect us. Because that day I had the feeling of what does it mean being 9 hours without any possibility to do anything, to connect, to have internet, to have mobile phone, and so on. And you feel that you are totally in the hands of... So my point about that is this problem of being independent, being autonomous, is probably the most important issue for the future. And it is also the way to mobilize energies. And frankly speaking, on that, we can mobilize energies no matter you have sovereignist or you are Europeanist. I say that not because I'm neutral on that. I'm biased, I'm pro-European. But I know that in the European Council today, there are, for instance, 3 prime ministers not coming from small, new countries. 3 prime ministers representing 3 funders, 3 among the 6 funders of the European Union that are coming from political milieu that are not the political milieu traditionally pro-European, and within the majority of supporting von der Leyen and so on. So I know very well that the European Council today needs to have all together on board on missions that we have to get in a very pragmatic way, not ideological. My report is a very pragmatic report. I didn't mention any treaty change. I didn't mention any ideological approach. I mentioned only pragmatic tools and pragmatic missions to get independent, autonomous, to repatriate jobs, to keep capitals here and not let them flying. I think this is the approach on these topics, and this placard at the top of Berlaymont, I think, is absolutely necessary to be all mobilized in the right directions, and this is why also the people in Brussels and the Brussels bubble can play a fundamental role to that, knowing that there's a part that is in the hands of the European institutions and the part that is in the hands of member states.
Thank you very much. It was your intervention very interesting and as always very inspiring, and also combining as usual the high political vision with the technical approach, which is something very, very, very valuable. So let's join me to thank President Letta for his intervention. So we go on with our workshop with the last panel, and I invite here Professor Giuseppe Colangelo, and don't see me, that we will moderate the next panel.
Wolfie and Jeremy to join me to the stage. Let's keep Okay. Thank you very much. So for those who were eager to discuss about standardization, that's the right panel. We are going to focus on the relationship between patent protection, innovation, with a particular focus on standardization. I would say most of the topic that has been discussed in the previous panel are pretty interlinked with what we are going to address also in this panel. We heard about competitiveness, digital sovereignty, security, and we may all agree on the fact that standards are crucial in order to pursue and achieve all this goal and to secure technological leadership. And that's also the reason why, unsurprisingly, standard has so much geopolitical significance. And that is also the reason why we are going to deal with the topic also from a transatlantic perspective. Actually, this is the goal that I'm going to ask MEP Brando Benifei to address. I'm not sure whether the MEP is already remote connected because I don't see him. So in the meantime, I'm going to enjoy the presence of our speaker that I'm going to introduce, which are Jeremy Rawlinson, he head of EU Policy Government Affairs at Microsoft, and Jorge Scozzaro Feverini, which is Vice President Government Affairs at Qualcomm. And the structure of the panel will be pretty easy. I'm going to raise one question, a round of questions, in order to have most of the part devoted to the Q&A session, and waiting for the MEP that is going to address, let's say, the relationship with the US, also because of its capacity of president delegation for relationship with a trade in the US. The question that I have for you, Jeremy and Audrey, is about standardization. I mean, we know that in last couple of years, the European scenario has been, the attention of the European stakeholder has been mainly captured by the proposal on the standard essential patents protection, but we also know that standardization are not just related to SEPs. So what I would like to talk with you is about the role of standardization. Feel free, of course, also to address, if you want, the topic related to the ICP proposal, because as we know, there is the possibility that in the next few weeks we will have a sort of revival of the discussion of the proposal. I don't know where we are going to withstand the withdrawal. That could be a good TV series from this perspective. And I will start from Jeremy, if you prefer. The floor is yours.
Well, thank you. And it's always the most exciting panel when we talk standardization. I hope you all can hear me in the back. You hear me better now? Fantastic. Well, I'll try to make standardization as exciting as possible, but I can speak a bit about CEPS. I think, as you mentioned, there'll be a revival in that discussion. And, while Microsoft is looking at the space much, much more broadly, and I hope that we have a chance to talk about that, particularly the transatlantic aspect that you mentioned, particularly in a technology space, standards play a tremendously important role. I think that goes almost without saying, but it's important to emphasize something else that normally goes without saying, is how complex these ecosystems are. Much of these technologies capture research, captures talent, capture markets that don't stick to one region alone. I know Alessandro mentioned earlier that the EU is the only open market, but Ericsson mentioned that its biggest market is the US and India. So you can see where standards do play a role for companies operating wherever they might be. And it's really important when we're looking at emerging technologies that you have all of those companies and representatives from ecosystems around the table. So that happens at international level, that happens at European level, that happens at national level within Europe. Standards play a tremendously important role when I think sometimes we overstate the difference between policy challenges from one region to the next. I don't think that the US and the EU really disagree on as much as sometimes we think they do in the Brussels bubble. If we think about cybersecurity, for example, many of the challenges there are challenges that are under discussion, have been under discussion in the US for many, many years, whether it's secure products, whether it's securing critical infrastructure. I think the good news is that we do agree on the threats, we agree on those challenges, and then we want to get prescriptive enough to ensure there's a level of harmonization there. We also want to allow room for that innovation. But that conversation's happening in the US, that conversation's happening in Europe, and what we would like to see, and we encourage as a global company, but for the benefits, I think, of the ecosystem, is making sure that there's reciprocity when possible around that. That prevents some of the patchwork and duplicative standards that can come up that may not serve the same purpose. So if the EU is regulating critical infrastructure and have done that first, that's something that the EU or the US could look at and borrow, ideally, and vice versa. We also want to make sure that a product that's certified as safe in one jurisdiction can be recognized as such in another jurisdiction. That's going to be incredibly important as we continue to develop more and more AI software and services. I think it also provides a benefit in the context of compliance. There's a number of concepts and newly introduced terms and terminologies and things like the AI Act. The CRA has a reference to a tremendous amount of standards, and standards can be a much easier way for some of those startups, medium-sized companies, but also bigger companies like ours to understand what compliance can look like, whether providing a presumption of conformity, but once again, motivating the adoption of those standards. Is it market access? Is it simplicity? Is it ease of doing business? We would like to see more and more alignment, and I think there's appetite for that in some parts, both sides of the Atlantic. And cyber comes to mind, AI comes to mind, and you're hearing a call for that more and more from some of our customers in Europe. We want to demonstrate compliance with many of the EU rules that have been adopted. It's much easier to do that very often when you can certify against a standard, but we do need the standards to be there in the first instance. So standards naturally are industry driven, but with government stakeholders around the table, and that is what we want to see. We want to make sure that we continue to be involved in those conversations, and so can our customers, whether they're in Europe, whether they're in the US. AI in particular is one of the really exciting technologies, and I know there's still challenges with that, and we don't want to minimize any of that, but the way to have laws and rules in place to protect against some of those challenges, standards can play a very important role, and we need to be able to have those conversations and make sure there's as inclusive as possible, and ideally in a way that they can enter into force or be present before compliance is happening. If you look at the AI Act, there's a lot of reference to AI harmonized standards there. Some of those may not be ready by the time compliance needs to be ready, which will make it harder to know and be certain of conformity that you need to have in place for compliance purposes and enforcement that's going to come after that. So I'm actually really optimistic about the cyber security because I think that's a mutual challenge. We're seeing things that are happening very much increasingly and generally across borders. The EU and the US have a lot of experience in that space, and there's dialogues that are going on that we would continue to encourage. It would be great to see even more of that in an AI context. And once we get to Europe, seeing increasing leveraging of some of those ISO standards that then Sensenelec can transport into European standards. And we'll see and watch what develops in the common specification space. We supported standards for many years. We're one of the world's largest contributors to the development of standards at an international level, as well as within Europe. So we definitely recognize the importance that it provides, not just from an interoperability standpoint, but once again, sometimes that presumption of conformity. And I would argue that doing it once does allow for much more efficiency and simplicity and emphasizing the opportunities then for the reciprocity that could occur there.
There's the button. Is it good now? Yes. Okay. I really don't know where to start because I had prepared a lot of things for this panel, and I'm very, very happy to be part of the eminent speakers today. So thank you for inviting Qualcomm. I'm still going to stick with what I had to say at the beginning because I still believe this is important, and I think the Spina mentioned it in her remarks. So I read carefully the two reports, and to me, they are a recipe for success. Of course, talking about the Letta and the Draghi report, but I wanted to take a step back because I read everything that Mr. Letta has written, and when he's speaking as well, I'm just a big fan, okay? So I just need to disclose this. But as well, in this book, okay, he mentioned something that resonated to me a lot, and he was quoting Jacques Delors, and he was saying, nobody, Mr. Delors was saying that, okay, nobody will be falling in love with the single market. And, you know, I've been thinking a lot about that because when I was like 10 years old, and that's my anecdote, but I wanted to share that because there is a link with standardization. So we had a referendum in 92 in France. It was the referendum for the Treaty of Maastricht. To me, that was like super cool, but like really super cool to have a space of freedom without barriers and fragmentation. I don't know why, but to me, it resonated a lot. And why I'm mentioning that with innovation and standardization, because they are really like those values rooted in the treaties, but as well, I would say, behavior that have been used by many players from the industry for probably like 40 years now, you know, and there are many variations of standardization. There are many bodies. They are all very, very important. And just to echo what Jeremy was saying, I think Qualcomm participate to more than 100 standardization organizations. Mainly at the beginning, what Alessandro was mentioning about the telcos participating in standardization, we were mainly on cellular technology. This is where still Qualcomm is investing a lot, but there are many, many new areas now where we do participate, and they are a very good convener in, I would say, playing big and fast for everybody. So it is a very democratic process too. And that's why, you know, I'm getting back to the treaty and the fourth freedom and the fifth freedom, because this is exactly what we should aim for. So that's on the positive aspect of standardization, and happy to say more as well. One of the body that we do participate and invest a lot with some of our engineers, this is within the 3GPP, and within ETSI, but we do as well participate more and more in national standardization body organization. So mentioning as well the presence of Elena, we send Senelec, so there are massive activities. And for some reason, this is like, I would say, very silent to the world. People don't realize the magic and beauty of standardization. So I'm here, you know, to make it, that's cool, okay? That's cool, that's efficient, and that's a way to remove barriers. And already when I was 10 years old, 12 years old, I had this. And I believe, like Mr. Letta was saying it before, but how we can, as industries, as private sector, as NGOs, national entity, organization, how we can basically push this forward. And that's why I'm here today. On the point on the SCP regulation, just very few things.
That is lovely and
Which is the opposite of innovation. Okay, I would say that. But it has been a challenge for many players in the industry, including Qualcomm, but many European companies too. And I think for many reasons that I'm not going to discuss today. But the problem was about the fragmentation. It was absolutely not creating a united front to address the future. And in the Letta report, there are some very interesting development about Mr. Letta visiting Ericsson. So I'm not gonna, I'm gonna not say more, but talking about the evolution of the telecom sector and the beauty of what happened over the past 40 years. So I have numbers that I wanted to share with you. And I need to quote, because one of the numbers is coming from Ericsson yesterday. Gaby Mosler, I was with her in Paris, who were invited as innovator by the European Patent Office. So if we look at scale, because this is what we are talking about. In 2016, already 9 years ago, we had more subscription on cell phone than people on the planet. Okay? Already 9 years ago. If you look at now, and this is quoting the engineers from Ericsson, we have more people using smartphone than people using toothbrush. Don't ask me why they look at this, okay? But you will remember that. Yeah, I know. But you know, that's people will remember this. But it shows as well the success of those technologies, but as well the success of the people and the companies, and not just the companies, but I would say the government that been putting the right incentive in the right place to have probably the fastest technology adopted on the planet. And it is just the beginning. I know we're still slow a little bit on 5G, okay, in the rollout. But to use an Italian example, I have a small house in Italy in the middle of Lazio. I have 5G connectivity, full speed. So I know that we like to say that, or we like to say maybe it's not correct, but we look at what is not working in Europe. But I think it's good to look at what is working as well, very good in Europe, and how we can really accelerate with the strengths that we have. And on the point on the recipe regulation, that was not something that would help Europe, but more globally, many players investing in innovation.
So thank you. Jeremy, have you any reaction on the SEP regulation? Because I'm pretty sure that from the audience, some question is going to be raised about the, we'll call the elephant, because it's even bigger than the elephant in the room.
Yeah, I was distracted by the toothbrush. How that could be calculated. But no, I think, listen, we follow that proposal as well. I think you're always looking at trade-offs there. You can understand the dynamics a bit, but transparency matters. Transparency matters, and transparency matters in a compliance context. And what we're seeing with a lot of the customer questions we get about compliance with EU rules is just, is the transparency or the clarity of that. And when it comes to CEPS, I think there was opportunities with the proposal to provide more transparency to that system, and that's something that we're always going to support. But I think the standardization opportunity, let's not dive too much just into the CEPS question, because I think we're seeing it come up more and more in a cybersecurity context, in an AI context, in a over-regulation context. Standards can be a low-hanging fruit, I believe, to address some of these concerns about clarity with compliance to EU rules. It'll be much, much easier to have a standard that provides a presumption of conformity to which you can certify than to go back and forth with interpretations of ambiguous terms in a text. But we need to have those standards emerge in order to comply and certify against them. On the CEPS context, always happy to answer questions, of course, but I think the standardization opportunity and the debate is something that spans much, much more broadly than simply standard essential patents.
Okay, thank you. They told me that MEP Brandifei is connected. Let me check. Yeah, I can see him. Okay, thank you very much for joining us. As I mentioned at the very beginning of the panel, I'm taking advantage of your role as president of delegation for relationship with the US, and also as a member of the Committee on International Trade. Asking you to provide your perspective in a transatlantic angle on the EU agenda on innovation when it comes, again, also in terms of relationship with the US. And talking about connectivity, seems that works pretty well because you're also working. So that's
yes.
Again one of the huge.
Yes, unfortunately, exactly due to my role as chair, I have an institutional commitment, but I didn't want to renounce to give a little contribution to this great discussion. I want to congratulate for the organization of this very timely debate, because I think we are exactly in the right moment for having this discussion. I hope you can hear me fine. So
we can hear you, we can see you, and yes, you are the perfect representative of the IoT. I mean, you are a multitasking player. I don't know whether you're also driving an airplane or just a car, but
no, I don't drive the car. No, I don't drive the car. That would be a very bad image on security. But you will also see more light soon. But in the meantime, if I may jump in on the point, so as I was saying, it's a very crucial moment. In fact, I just came back from the US and I will be back there in around 10 days to have a mission with the chair of the Trade Committee of the European Parliament to discuss exactly the ongoing negotiations. So, you know, yesterday I met some council members that today have the meeting to decide on the list and on the further steps, and we are really in the middle, as I said, of the discussion. The tech agenda is central. I have to say, in fact, as you might know, I was the rapporteur of the AI Act. I have found a lot of attention for the first time, broadly, not only by the specific experts, on the issue of the AI Act, and not only on DSA and DMA, that has always been at the center of the attention. Because with the new ideological agenda of the White House, I'm calling it in a neutral fashion, the free speech crusade has become central in the narrative. So with the AI Act influencing the way you develop models regarding, for example, their ability or inability to tell people to kill themselves or to commit crimes or to teach them how to create a bomb or to produce pedopornographic content. All these areas that we are contrasting together with the possibility of creating hateful content, subliminal manipulation. As you might know, this is forbidden by the, if you might remember, it's forbidden by the AI Act. So all of this that is regarding what we can do with the generative AI has been considered as an attack to free speech, in the way that we, with the Brussels effect, as it's called, we influence the way the models will also work in US. And I've been in discussions with the administration on this point, and I've been quite sincere, together with other colleagues, not just me, to be frank, that no one is, and we are happy, I mean, no one is obliging, but we are happy that the American companies are doing their part in our well-being in Europe. But we cannot change the rules in Europe because this might influence how they work in US. This is not something we can accept as a discussion. Yes, it's true, there is a Brussels effect when we deal with also with AI. I know it very well. I negotiated the law, and we can say that also maybe about other legislation. But we do not think that this can lead to changing these regulations, because they are influencing also the way the systems work in other places. We have been clear on this, and I have to say today I had the discussion with the European Commission about the, I hope you can hear me. I see a lot of smiling like you are not hearing me, but I think you are
it's
hearing.
not because of
Okay.
you, it's some technical issues.
Okay.
You are performing outstandingly, I would say.
Okay, fantastic. Are you going to give me a prize in the end for the performance? So to getting to the conclusion. So today I had the chance to discuss with the Commission. We had the hearing in the INTA committee about the ongoing negotiations, also from Commission side, and it was reiterated that there is no availability to reopen the digital legislation. But to be frank, it's not because also of a ideal stance of the Commission. It's also the temperature in the European Parliament. You know, we have been reopening some laws. We have been reopening, for example, the environmental reporting. And this is very much liked by the American business. I can see that by talking to them, that we are rediscussing with the omnibus legislation, you know about that, the environmental reporting. But on the digital legislation, simply we are not going to accept that we go beyond simplification that we are already discussing. Yes, simplification for SMEs, simplification for access to the side of the Atlantic. But we are not going to abandon the idea that the digital space or the generative AI should be regulated, also looking at contrasting risks linked to the issues I exemplified earlier, which are real issues. We know the strong attention of the First Lady of the United States to the issue of children protection. And so we have seen some openings on discussion on children, which I consider, it's my own personal opinion, very much linked, in fact, to the role of the First Lady. But on the rest, we see a lot of contrast. But I think that this should be accepted. We have different approaches. In Europe, free speech is not conceived as the same in US. It's a fact. And to be frank, I think that, as I know you've been discussing about the standards, and I conclude on this point, it's important that we try anyway. I know that there are some ongoing decisions, in fact, with the NIST in US, that in fact are not going so far from many things we also believe in. So apart from the big political discussion and sometimes contrast on the actual decisions, I think we can find better coordination and some common terrain. And this is important, I would say, also because we could say the less contentious part of the AI Act, which is the one dealing with the regulation of high-risk use cases, is strongly linked to the standards development. And so it's important that there is a dialogue and convergence as much as possible. Clearly, on other topics, like the transparency on generative AI and maybe the copyright protection, which is also a very complex issue, we might stay a bit far away. But I think we should also accept that and manage our differences, understanding that we are allies. And I really want to conclude on this note. And that's the message we have been giving to Washington. We think we should be treated as allies. The language sometimes was not really reflecting that, what we have heard or read in leaks on private chats, but that's something we should try to overcome and instead be understanding that, considering the world we live in and the threats coming from other parts of the world and the need to have security in our supply chains, also looking at the transatlantic relation, just to mention one very hot topic today also in Brussels, we need to find ways to work together, even when we are not completely on the same page. Thank you very much.
Thank you for being with us despite the overlap and with your institutional agenda and task, and despite the mobility issues. So we really succeed. We demonstrate that connectivity is crucial. We hope to have you in present next time. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
And so, as promised, I would open the floor for a Q&A session. I have also an additional microphone if you want. Okay, 2 additional microphones. So, lady over there. Okay.
Thank you. I'm Megan Richards. I wanted to ask you a question which is linked a little bit to what Enrico Letta said about innovation and the private sector. And that relates to the importance of standardization, which is primarily coming from industry, isn't it? And he also mentioned the importance of private sector innovation and investment in innovation and R&D, which is, of course, also very important. Ursula von der Leyen has said, and I'm not quoting directly, I'm interpreting, that the Trump effect has meant she is ready to put forward 500 million euros to encourage more researchers to come to the European Union, which of course is very, very good. But isn't there an important role for the private sector in this context too? And where do you see the barriers to this? I mean, I know about the many labor restrictions that are there, but surely there's a way for improving this and making the private sector take an even more active role in encouraging investment in this sector.
I can try to go first. I think it's a fantastic question, and it's a really important point. Microsoft has been in Europe for several decades now, and I think we've made, just over the past 18 months, significant investments in AI infrastructure. This is close to $20 billion in investments over the past 18 months that we plan to expand in the coming 3 years to 40% more investments. So our footprint in Europe, particularly at an infrastructure level, reflects, I think, the needs of our customers and also many of the research and development that's also taking place here that we're contributing to. We have some of our research centers. Our most recent quantum breakthrough came from our research and development teams in Denmark. So we feel very much part of that R&D community here in Europe. When you get to that talent question, I don't think there's one thing that's holding that back. And she may have framed it in the context of a Trump moment. It's going to be a little more complicated than that to see it happen. I think I'll leave that to some of the political discussions. I do think what we'd like to see more of is opportunities for the shared R&D to already happen more seamlessly and efficiently. Much of this research, whether it's university cooperations, stems continents. It's not just within Europe. We have consortia of European universities to which we contribute, but we also have examples where European universities and researchers are working with their American counterparts, with some of our teams on the other side of the Atlantic. And what does seem interesting, and copyright was one example of this many years ago, is the different frameworks that are in place that allow different parts of those consortia to do different things. There were certain techniques and possibilities that were available outside of Europe that might not have been available inside of Europe. There was funding that could have gone to certain parts of the project outside of Europe versus within Europe. So I think if they're keen on expanding the talent base, and I know that they are, because you can see that come through in the AI continent plans, you can see that come through in a cyber context, you see it even in a green skilling context, it's not going to be one measure that gets us there. It's going to have to be several of those things. The good news is, I think that's an area where we have a lot of alignment with the European Commission's agenda because of the talent needs that we see on the market, even just from our own hiring needs, particularly in a cybersecurity context. We're excited about what AI can do to address some of those gaps at the moment, but AI is also going to need new sets of skills. So there's really a laundry list, I would say, of preparing that workforce of the future and ensuring that all of the benefits from AI and the challenges from cybersecurity, that we're meeting that with the most effective set of research community and teams. So supportive, but I think there's going to be a lot more to it than the one announcement for sure.
Right, sorry. Megan, thank you so much for the question. I have one thing in mind, and it's true that probably it's like a laundry list or Christmas list, but one thing as welcome, we've been advocating, it was in the previous mandate, but this is still relevant regarding what is happening like globally on the planet. In the context of the TTC, maybe saying this now seems odd, but in the context of the CCC and the number of discussion we had on semiconductor, and the chipset crisis we had, one of the suggestions we made along with a number of companies such as Intel, ASML, I think with IMEC too, was to create something that is in fact in the Letta report, but we were before, was to create a free movement of PhD researcher. And that was, I would say, inside Europe, but really inside Europe, but as well between Europe and the US. And I do believe that it's still a valid suggestion. We were advocating this to a number of people at the parliament. Everybody was saying it's great. I still don't get why it was not adopted, but maybe, maybe we thought it was so great that we were confident that that would be taken. But still, having this and, having like a sponsor, like any member state, really saying, okay, in my mandate under von der Leyen, I'm going to make sure that we have free movement of researcher. But it applies as well. I think this was for college student, I think in the Letta report. This is super important because it creates synergies. it creates knowledge. On AI as an example, I'm pretty sure this is the same as Microsoft. We have people from across the world working on AI. It's not like, well, we have R&D center in Amsterdam as an example, but all my engineers on standardization, they're coming from everywhere. But the more you create the synergies, the more you share, the more you get bigger and better. It's the same than on standardization. So if maybe one of the call for action, in addition to my call on action on the fifth freedom that I really endorse, clearly, if we could, as players, maybe we could launch this with Jeremy, with Microsoft, but really pushing this forward. And of course, there are challenges in terms of insurance, in terms of relationship with universities. Carmen was mentioning to me that Enrico was mentioning the problem in Milan with the 4 universities. But I had the same when I was studying in Paris. In one corridor, it was La Sorbonne. In another one, it was Assas. But creating more synergies and collective knowledge, it's probably where we will have more like attracting the best talent, but as well sharing in this knowledge economy. This is up to us to make it happen.
Question whether I'm going to compete with Benifei in terms of mobility, even as small as.
Thank you. I have a question that is also a word of caution, because we've mentioned the Brussels effect in a positive way, but especially on these edges of the technical advancement, the Brussels regulation effect may actually also have its limits. Where do you see that limit? Where, for example, due to the regulation in Europe, new developments are not put onto the European markets. They stay away from it because, for example, in China, it's easier. Facial recognition, autonomous driving, swarm technology. I mean, the Chinese drones fly in swarms, and they don't even bother to sell it outside China because the market is big enough. And of course, then, if they don't, the standardization also happens over there. Where do you see the danger of that the agenda will be taken out of our hand because EU regulation will actually keep people away and the innovation then happens elsewhere?
I'm happy to take it first. I think you need to be a little bit more surgical in your assessment, because with regulation or with standardization, you have the technical rules, but you have a number of sets and values, and everybody is free to decide on what they want to do. But if you look at, for instance, an example on 6G, okay, which is under development right now and which will be probably commercialized by 2030, you have a set of criteria that are defined by technical people, but you have as well some kind of, I would say, value criteria such as sustainability, as an example, that will be embedded in the standard. And this standard will likely be like an international, if I can say that, standard. Now, every country, and I would say every company, is free to decide on what to do or not. But as a company investing a lot in R&D, a US company, global company, regulation has never stopped us to innovate. Maybe some companies could say that, but for the company I'm working with, regulation has never been a stopper for us to continue to innovate.
I know there are some of those examples that you mentioned. I think I want to stay optimistic, and I hope it's not the case with AI in particular. I think we spend a lot of time right now talking about the AI Act, but regulating AI is more than just that one proposal. GDPR comes up. So if I go back to the Draghi Report, I think he calls out those 2 proposals as examples of where there could be a Brussels effect, but where it's also hard for smaller and medium-sized European businesses to understand all the rules therein. I think clarity matters in that space. And if I think about the AI adoption opportunity around the world, companies are getting excited about this technology, driving some of the efficiencies, adopting this technology. I would worry if question marks around compliance to rules that were adopted are still preventing and being a blocker to that adoption in Europe. And it's not because the rules are there. That's not the problem. You need rules in this space. And this comes back to Audrey's point, and we support the regulation, but there is a big difference between 2 pages of rules and 200 pages of rules. If you need tens of pages to explain what tens of pages mean, and you promise that you'll explain it again later down the road, that's not exactly the type of certainty that can come. And you can have strong rules with teeth that are just clearer. Customers should know where the borderlines are of their deployment scenarios without some of the ambiguity that comes from either ambiguous terms or ambiguous timelines or ambiguous interpretations. It's sometimes more that lack of clarity that could hold back the launch of new and exciting services, particularly in Europe. And that's just, I think, the question we're getting more and more from customers right now that are keen to adopt AI and deploy AI. It's just question marks of, are they allowed? It should be clearer than that.
Further question? You asked for a standard debate.
Yes, that's very good. Of course, I think that is very important that we understand that it's important to be representative of the European economy. 95% of the European economy is SMEs. You are big companies. I heard you have thousands or hundreds of experts working in standardization. And I'm afraid that it's not reflecting the European reality, because we have got several SMEs that are struggling to get engaged in standardization. There is actually a European association that is a small business standard that is really trying to educate SMEs on the benefits of standardization. So I'm going to benefit from your experience. And if you would have to convince a small company to contribute to European standardization, what would be your pitch on that? And also, if you have actually ever translated what is the return on investment that you as company have when you invest on European standardization or international standardization in general? Thank you.
No, it's a fantastic question. And I think the most important thing is we want the voices around the table. We also want governments around the table. You want to have this as inclusive a process as possible. The challenge is size. If you're a company of a startup with an exciting idea and you have 5 people and you hired a 6th or a 7th to read some of the EU rules that you need to identify, coming back to the question there, where are the resources for something like that? Standards can get naturally very, very technical. So it does depend a bit on the company, but we want them there. We want them there. Everybody wants them there. I think the question marks come around, what is that return on investment? The second part, if you spend 2 years sitting around those committee rooms and something comes out that provides an alignment to the type of product or service you're planning on launching, it can be a tremendous return on investment, because now you have clarity in your relevant local market where you might be having that conversation. If you're one of the first movers in that space, potentially that informs similar standards developments in other markets, or ideally recognition of that standard as a presumption of conformity, unless you reach new markets. So Microsoft invests heavily at the international layer, and then of course at the regional and local layer in the standards process. Because we're a global company with a global footprint, it's going to be easier for us to have a return on investment if we know there's one standard to which we can design our products and launch them all over the world. I think you can make that same argument for a smaller player, but the challenge is if you got 5 people in your company, how do you assign one of them to fly around to the relevant capitals where those conversations are happening and be aware of that process? You need somebody with standardization expertise. I can't participate in many of those standards conversations. I know EU law very well. I know EU proposals very well, but these are very technical discussions that naturally go through governance procedures to make sure there is that inclusion, that there is that transparency and openness. So we have a lot of standard experts, and I can attest to the fact that the careers that I've seen made in that space, these are very standard specific people that we're fortunate to have at a place like Microsoft. But for a smaller, medium-sized player, I know that that's a hard ask unless they see the expediency and the ability for their voice to get heard. I do think there's a difference between some of those smaller companies that are at the forefront of new technologies, where there, I would argue, the return on investment is even higher, versus others that might be more traditional industries for which standards already exist.
I think you covered most of the point, Jeremy, but maybe as well, one of the ideas we had, and we'd be happy to work with you at Sensenelec. We discussed with the European Commission for years about that, but discussing with how to engage more with small and medium company. So first, there are very few, but there are, okay? If you look at Etsy, I think that you have like more than 25 to 50 companies. Of course, there are various working groups, okay? But you do have some Not a lot, but we do have some European companies participating within ETSI and with GPP. For the new one, because for the newcomers, and discussing with some of them, and I've been discussing with Sebastiano Tofaletti for years about that. But first, it's a change of mindset too, because when you participate to standardization, basically you're going to share your best ideas or values with the others. So when you're small, you need to convince your CEO that first you're not gonna work at the office, you're gonna work somewhere else, and probably all the work done at the small HQ is gonna be shared with Ericsson or with Microsoft or in a smaller company from Finland. So there is this as well, and this is about the education and probably in technical institute and university on the value of standardization and how to cross-pollinize the industry. The second one, which is very, very basic to do, if we would use some of this EU big funding, like the, I forgot how they call the joint, I forgot the name, the joint project on research, okay, forgot the acronym. But if this money would go to really help SMEs on, one, helping to pay the bills for the person, the salary, the hotel, the accommodation, because most of the time what SME are saying, they do have the knowledge, but they don't have the money to fund a project for 2 years. And those are like very key things to do, but very easy to implement. And we just need to have this project as well. And maybe, European Standardization Organization could take that on with SMEs because that's very easy to implement. One project and then you can have as well, we were talking about, thanks to the question from Megan, about, this free movement of researcher, but we could have like part of, the European project on free movement of researcher, spending a bit of time with standardization organization to learn and, share more knowledge. And that's how you create communities and synergies. And I do believe that standardization model from various forms they do have are a very good example to make that happen. We have few SMEs, but they are participating. The question is how we can have more. And I think it goes to more like technical engineering schools, and as well, it could be a project within big companies on how they can participate. Thank you.
Thank you. The lunch has arrived, so that's the sign that our panel is ending. Please join me to thank the speaker, the in-present and online speaker of this panel. But before the lunch, I will give the floor to Scott for his concluding remarks.
Thank you. Good. Well, I'm happy to say that I'm standing between you and lunch. It just arrived, so I was afraid I might not be standing between you and lunch. So what have we heard today? It's all about really the strategic aspect of European technology development. We've heard a lot about standardization in this last panel. We've heard a lot about open strategic autonomy. We've heard a lot about research cooperation. I think a fundamental question that we've heard mostly today is really how open, how not open, how much cooperation, how much competition. And there, I think a phrase that's been making the rounds, which I think is relevant here, both in terms of operation within Europe and with third countries, is really as open as we can be, but as closed as we must be. And doing that in ways that don't represent a surrender to protectionism is important. And I guess with that closing thought, let's eat.